You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. And now your footwear insiders, Matt Priest and Andy Holt.
Creating and enhancing conversations on all things footwear.
That's your middle name, Andy.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That's a long middle name.
Andrew, creating what is it?
My mother and father must have been hippies then to have such a long
Yeah, it was
name.
so hard. When
They're probably academics.
When they were angry at you.
Academic hippies.
They couldn't shout at you because your name was too long.
Hey, you. Hey, Dopey, get over here. That was my dad's voice.
Dopey Senior, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Jasmine, how are you doing?
Great. And I wish my name was longer so my mom wouldn't yell at me all my life.
We can create a longer name for you.
Yeah, add a couple of middle names to me.
Folks, this is Shoe and Show. We cover the entire footwear industry, all types of shoes. I mean, bowling to slippers to heels. But also what we really try to drill down into is the footwear business. So things that impact our employees, things that impact our consumers, the models and shifts that are changing inside our industry. And one of the biggest things I think are happening right now to our industry and inside our industry, but also just nationally, is really an issue around education policy and college affordability, college access, fairness in access to college. And that impacts footwear workers across the country right now that are paying off student loans. It impacts nearly every footwear family out there that are preparing for college and getting ready for that, especially those who may be first-generation college kids that are going in. And it's a scary time when people are planning. But I would also argue, too, our talent pipeline. We got a lot of people who are graduating from college, maybe even specialized schools like design schools or things like that with large student loan debt. And how do we attract that talent and keep that talent in our industry? And so, when we talk about these issues, which I think are pretty much salient to every single person in our footwear industry, we have to bring in an expert. And this is one of those times, we've had a few times where we bring somebody in that is smarter than us, and it is rare.
Yes.
It is rare. But this guy may be smarter than us, and I think he is. It's Michael Dannenberg. He's the Director of Strategic Initiatives for Policy with the think tank Education Reform Now. And he leads their work on K through 16 education, finance, and high school through higher education initiatives. I've known Michael has been a friend of mine for, I can't even count the years, maybe we should not, but it's probably 17 years now. Michael was one of the first people I met in Washington, D.C. And it's crazy because I was working for a conservative member, and Michael worked for a number of years for Ted Kennedy, the Lion of the Senate. And during his time working on the Senate, he not only worked for Ted Kennedy as his lead counsel for education, he worked for Senator Pell, and you might know that from Pell Grants. Mm-hmm. He's worked in the executive branch on higher education issues, student aid, a lot of college completion initiatives, making sure that when people go into college, they actually have the ability to finish it, and they're not being scammed by certain colleges. So he worked in the Obama administration or Secretary Duncan. He was named one of the top 100 Hill staff on these issues, on the college affordability issues. It's a guy who has a lot of ideas, but also knows how to get them done. I personally have worked with Michael on education issues when I worked on Capitol Hill, and we're able to move the dial, hopefully, a little bit on discussions about affordability. So, Michael, teeing all that up, I hope you deliver today for us. And bring us
Matt, you were never that nice when we were roommates on Capitol Hill.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
That's a little known secret.
Yeah. Maybe we should scrap the education discussion, talk about Andy's,
Yeah. There was a third guy who was a Washington Post reporter who used to just tee up a topic for us when we came home and see us fight. And he would just walk away.
Like a little personal crossfire right there.
Exactly.
I think, honestly, if there had been TV cameras, it would have been the best reality TV show ever. Because Brian would throw something out there and laugh and walk away and just be like, But that's what I love is when I first came here, I was living with people who didn't share necessarily my political ideological views. Yeah.
And do it as friends.
Right. There was no cul-de-sac. It was learn these things. But education was something where I thought there's a lot of common ground on both sides.
Absolutely.
The fighting may be on the spending side or on how much regulation we have and who controls it, things like that. But I generally think everybody thinks people need an education.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So as we talk about college affordability and we talk about education policy, Michael, there's a lot of people working in the footwear industry that have some or a large amount of student loan debt that they've accumulated. They've come out. Some people are just fresh out of college. Some people have been dealing with this for 5 years or 10 years. And I think more and more it seems to hang on people, right? It becomes this kind of just this anchor on someone who's trying to pay for a house or pay for a car and have a quality life, and they've got 10%, 20% of their paycheck going towards this. So when we see that, what are, from your purview of working on this for many, many years, what are some tips or strategies people can think about in addressing that kind of large debt that they may hold?
Yeah, I think when the student loan issue is really sort of key to individual circumstances and risk tolerance when it comes to dealing with the debt that a lot of folks have. I'm always struck when I talk to people about student loans. I ask them what type of loans they have, and they have no idea. I ask them what their interest rate is. They have no idea. And most people who have student loans have multiple loans. They have private student loans. Then they have student loans that the federal government has either issued or backs. And those loans tend to have very different interest rates, not just private versus federal student loans, but then within the federal system, there are all kinds of different interest rates, whether you have a Stafford loan or a Perkins loan or so forth. So I think the first question for anyone is to identify what type of loans you have, private versus federal, and what the interest rates are. And then when it comes to sort of dealing with repayment issues, in general, I recommend paying down private loans first. Private loans tend to charge higher interest rates over the long term, and they lack consumer protections that are attendant to federal student loans. So you want to get rid of those private student loans as quickly as you can, even if they seemingly have a low interest rate now. It's sort of like the mortgage crisis back a decade ago. Those rates tend to be variable and they can jack up quickly. And if you lose your job or you have some sort of other financial or medical crisis for that matter, private student loan companies are not usually very forgiving. Whereas with the federal student loan system, you have a number of options when it comes to repaying your debt. So number one is I would pay down your private student loan debt first. And then number two is when dealing with your federal student loan debt, I think a lot of folks don't realize that they have multiple repayment options. And when you get out of school, you get out of a 4-year college, hopefully, you end up on a standard repayment plan where, as a default, where you're expected to pay off your loan debt over a 10-year period. But in fact, there are multiple repayment options for folks that they can opt into, multiple federal loan repayment options. There's extended loan repayment. There's something called income-driven repayment, where you pay only a portion of your salary. And then within that, there are all kinds of classifications. So if you go to studentaid.ed.gov, www.studentaid.ed.gov, you can get a rundown on your federal student loan repayment options. But the one I sort of want to highlight, which really was created under the first Bush administration, under George W. Bush in 2007, 2008, but dramatically expanded under President Obama, is income-driven repayment, where generally the folks can choose to lower their monthly payments to 10% of their discretionary income. Discretionary income is essentially your income minus whatever the poverty line is for your family. So for a family of 2, that's $16,000. For a family of 4, it's $26,000. So let's say you're making, $66,000. You're in a family of 4. You, of the $40,000 difference between the poverty line and your income, you're expected to pay 10% of that approximately for student loans. That's $4,000 a year over a 12-month period. That's about $330 a month That's regardless of the size of your debt. So it's a way to reduce your payment, but it's sort of like a credit card.
Right.
You pay a little and it stretches out over a longer period of time.
Some people may not realize, but there's some people out there who have $800, $900, $1,000 a month if they don't restructure it and don't think about these things. So when we talk about $300, $400, that becomes a lot more. It's a lot easier to pay back than it is stretching out this $1,000 payments that these people have that we see on CBS News or ABC. That and it's becoming more common, unfortunately, that those higher payments are happening.
That's absolutely correct. And I think the big thing to keep in mind, too, is that a lot of folks will lose their jobs and suddenly they can't make their payment, be it $200 or $1,000. Whereas with income-based repayment or income-driven repayment, if you have a very low income, you don't have to pay anything. Plus, under the federal system, you can do things like forbearance, or if you go back to school, deferment. So all those benefits are not available under private student loans. So in general, pay down your private student loans first if you can, and then get to your federal student loans and consider your repayment options.
So a lot of us in the footwear industry have children.
Yeah.
And I have three daughters. I think we have 6 daughters amongst us at FDRA, and we're all of our kids are pretty young. My oldest is almost 15, and so we're thinking about how we save for college and what that looks like. What's your advice on how I should be thinking about costs, where I should be saving, how much should I be saving? We do the 529s, but what are some of the tools that we should be looking at for sure?
Yeah, well, you've got a couple of big questions in there. Sort of how much does college cost, and how should we be thinking about savings, or what I'll focus on. I've got a 9-year-old myself, and I think about these questions personally every day. I think one of the big things folks frankly get wrong is that they overestimate how much college costs, and they underestimate how much financial aid is available. Most regular folks think it costs, $70,000 all in to go for 1 year, which is what Harvard charges or NYU charges as a sticker price. But the truth of the matter is very, very few people pay sticker price. There's a discount. In fact, at nonprofit private colleges and universities, over 80% of students get a tuition discount. And on average, those discounts are in the 50% range.
Wow.
So whereas sticker price is, say, $70,000 at an NYU, the net price, that is the price after discounts and grant aid or scholarship aid, is about $36,000 for a year. That's number one. The second thing people sort of get wrong about in overestimating the cost of college is they think about, not only do they think about sticker price, but they think about only nonprofit private universities. But really, 75% of all students go to public colleges and universities. About 40-odd% go to community colleges. The remainder of that 75% go to public four-year institutions, big schools. Like Andy's from North Carolina, the UNC system, North Carolina State, Ohio State, Florida State. Yeah, there you go. But these public colleges charge much, much less. The sticker price for a year at a public four-year college nationally is on average about $22,000. But then when you look at the net price, that is after the discounts, we're down to $15,000 a year. So again, it's not $70,000 that an NYU or Harvard sticker price is. For most families who are going to college, we're looking at maybe something in the range of $15,000 nationally. That varies markedly by state. The second part of that answer, though, was that people underestimate financial aid. Everyone is eligible and can receive federal financial aid. Bill Gates' kid can get a federal student loan.
Wow.
It's called an unsubsidized federal student loan, but it's still got all kinds of consumer benefits that I mentioned earlier attached to it. Your typical Pell Grant recipient, there are 8 million Pell Grant recipients out there. The maximum Pell Grant aid is over $6,000 per kid. And basically a family with $60,000 in income or less is pretty much going to get a Pell Grant. Plus there's the American Opportunity Tax Credit, which is now up to $10,000 over the course of 4 years for upper middle income families. So there's a ton of financial aid out there. So number one is, folks, don't be too scared off by the sticker price. Recognize that Folks are charged less when it comes to college, in particular based on the institution they select. There's all kinds of financial aid out there.
Is there negotiating? My nephew just went to UNC Chapel Hill, God save his soul. And he, what I found out during the process is there was a lot of negotiation, like you're buying a car, and to your point on the sticker price. So that was a surprise to me.
Well, there's the opportunity to negotiate.
Right.
How much negotiation goes on depends on consumers who are aware that there's this opportunity to negotiate, and a lot are not aware of that opportunity. And frankly, it's a stacked deck, right? When you go to buy your used car, it's not like you hand over your tax returns first to the used car salesman and say, well, let's now negotiate price. But that's exactly the way it works when it comes to higher education. The fortunate thing, though, is that it's in a very competitive market. So you can play schools off one another and get a better financial aid package. You asked about how to save, and interrupt me if I'm going on too long.
No, that's fine.
I think when it comes to saving on the cost of college, there's sort of two key things to keep in mind. I mean, first of all, I guess the short answer is you want to save as much as you can because there's really no better personal or family financial investment than higher education. But let me give you the sort of scary number for you and with respect to how much you need to save. Let's say you are very, very wealthy. You're in the top 5% of income. And you're going to be paying closer to that sticker price. Well, I got a 9-year-old. I'm estimating that $70,000 top end price right now for 1 year at NYU, no discount, no aid because you're from an super upper income family. I'm guessing that in 9 years when she's going to start, it's going to be about $115,000 a year. That's the scary number.
That's the inflation that we see over time.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, median family income is not going up, and the cost of higher education is going up. And part of the reason for that is because it's outpacing median family income, is because demand is extremely high, and people will borrow, and the colleges know people will borrow. State legislators know people will borrow, and they're borrowing huge sums.
That's interesting.
But one of the ways to knock, to better prepare yourself is in terms of savings, is not only to save in a tax preferred vehicle. I'm a big fan. Again, the individual circumstances matter, but I'm a big fan of saving through a Roth IRA because with an IRA. With a Roth IRA in particular, or in another IRA, you can do a tax-free early withdrawal for not just for retirement, but also for things like first-time home purchase or post-secondary college expenses. If you are not eligible for a Roth plan, or depending on your tax situation, it may be better. There's also the 529 option, which is also tax preferred, tax-free growth. And in a lot of cases, if you contribute to a 529 in your home state, you can get a tax benefit to boost on top of that, a tax credit to reduce your annual taxes. So save through tax preferred vehicles. The other big way to save is what you can do as a parent vis-a-vis your kids. I tell folks all the time, we want to reduce the cost of college. Just get people to graduate on time. Mm-hmm. I mean,
I try to sketch out my college career to 5 years, and my dad was like, "I don't think so." There was no joke there. That really happened.
Yeah, I mean, back when I was a boy, you were supposed to get a 4-year degree in 4 years.
Right.
Today, the typical bachelor's degree recipient, full-time student, gets their degree in 5 years, not 4.
Wow.
Typical associate's degree student, full-time, gets their degree in 3 years, not 2. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that students are coming in underprepared, and they're having to take developmental, or what less diplomatically is called remedial education classes that don't count toward college credit. Another reason is credits often don't transfer, and when students move from one college to another, and a third of all students transfer. Over 40% of a third of all students transfer. 2/3 of all students take courses at more than one institution, even if they don't transfer. full time.
So it'll be like a community college to get some credits, and then
Right.
hopefully that transfers in somewhere.
Well, there's a GAO study, Government Accountability Office study, that found that approximately 40% of credits are lost in transfer. So that is a tremendous inefficiency in the system, and it's a big problem for students. But one of the things a parent can do in terms of avoiding this loss or slow time to degree is A, make sure your student is being well prepared in high school so that they're not having to take remedial courses at the post-secondary level. But B, you can get your kids signed up for AP courses, dual enrollment courses. There's edX online platform. The College Board has something called the Collegiate Learning Examination Program, CLEP. CLEP exam results are taken in over 2,000 colleges and universities across the country, and that can be converted, and they take them and convert it into college credit. So when I started, I went to Boston University, so I like to pick on it. When I started there, I had 8 credits worth, which is half of one semester. I wish I had more, so I could have saved more money along the way. So save in tax preferred vehicles and get your kids well prepared in high school, either just so they're college ready in terms of their academic readiness, or better yet, AP dual enrollment edX online like courses.
Probably too, like make sure when they're signing up for classes, it's the right classes. Making sure that they're going to class and not failing a class because they didn't show up. So, if they're not an early riser, maybe they don't want to do 8 a.m. classes. Taking a mix of online classes could reduce the cost of a credit, perhaps, at some universities. Things like that. I think Michael's dead on this is you have to be involved in high school and you have to be involved in college to make sure that if we're spending this much money on an education, which is well worth the money to spend, but these kids are 18 to 20 to 22 years old and still need help. Making sure that they understand the cost and then understand their responsibility to get the education they need.
And
go ahead.
I was just going to say I'm a transfer student as well, and I picked my transfer school based on the amount of credits that would transfer over. I think some people see oh, I would like to go to this school, and it's just well, let's do the research on how this is going to transition. And I think it's more about, oh, this program looks nice, or this school looks fun, or they have great programs like activities outside of educational activities. And I think if the focus was on the credits, that people would be able to still graduate on time. Because I transferred my sophomore year and I graduated within the 4 years.
Yeah.
Good for you. College selection is the sort of big under-examined area when it comes to college affordability. Where you go plays an enormous role in terms of how much you ultimately pay. And I think most parents, they just want their kid they want everything for their kid. So whatever their kid wants, they're like, yeah, we'll make it work. We'll borrow whatever it takes. And that's not always the best decision for the family or for the student.
Yeah.
Well, in my home, so my parents paid for my 4 years at NC State. My wife she came from a working family. She had to take out loans. And she went to NC State as well. She graduated in 3.5 years because ultimately she knew it was on her. And I graduated in 4, so I didn't do the 5. But there was a different, we both approached it in different ways because she had to own the loans after the fact, and we paid them off as a married couple. But that also impacted how she approached school and how much she got out. She got a lot more out of her education than I did. Just based on
and
that.
It shows. So
this is true.
One of the other things that's really impacting our industry is kind of pipelines. These folks coming out of institutions with high debt. When you're talking about compensation and making sure that employees are happy. So as we look out there across the U.S., there's more and more companies that are looking at this as part of retention issues, pipeline issues. So there's Starbucks, Walmart, Chipotle. They're all partnering with individual colleges on programs that they can give their employees, or paying down student loan debts as part of their compensation, are offering other high education employee benefits to attract and retain the talent. So it seems pretty important right now in a tight labor market to keep your best employees, and your best employees may be highly educated and may have these loans hanging over their heads. So how should C-suite folks, executives, HR people be looking at these issues, and what can they do to try to add in some kind of benefits for employees in the footwear space?
I think that's an excellent question. It goes back to your earlier question about individuals and sort of what's advice for them in terms of paying down their debt. The truth of the matter is there's no one-size-fits-all solution. You need personalized advice. I think this is one of the problems with a lot of employee benefit plans is they're the same for all employees, assuming that they all have similar circumstances. And folks have all kinds of different types of student loans, debt levels, debt to income levels. So I think there's a large role to be played for personalized advice. I know that, for example, I participate in the TIA CREF retirement plan. I want to get advice on my retirement. I can speak to a TIA CREF advisor, and they will give me personalized advice. When I ask that person for education advice, maybe I'm a more discerning customer, but I'm pretty disappointed in the quality of advice I get. So I think employees would benefit markedly from personalized services that are offered that cover the range, not just repayment of loans for themselves, but also saving for college,
Right.
preparing for college, admissions to college, which is in the news and maybe you'll want to talk about as well. So that's the first thing I would keep in mind. The second is I think 529s are an underutilized vehicle for by business and by individuals. Most people think of 529s in terms of saving for their kid. Sort of, for those who don't know, it's kind of like a 401k or a retirement plan. Only can be used for education, only for your child. But that's, I shouldn't say only for your child. That's in fact the misnomer. Is it's not only for your child. You can take out a 529 in your own name for your own training. So employers could, I've always thought they should consider opening 529s for their employees' training, because the employee can use those funds not just for their own training, but they could also choose to pass it on to their children for their children's education. And whereas a lot of employer benefit plans now target tuition reimbursement, 529 funds can be used for any college expenses, and it gets the benefits of tax deferred growth. And an employer even could convert it into a severance package if it wanted to, because you can.
We got ideas, folks.
You could
Listen up.
You can cash out a 529. You pay a 10% penalty if you're using it for non-education expenses, but nevertheless, it's benefit from tax deferred growth. The money is there, and right now the surveys indicate that when it comes to employee use of higher education benefits, the take-up rate's pretty low. It's maybe 5% when it comes to things like tuition reimbursement. But if you couple that as not just something that's for the employee, but for the employee's children or their designee, could be like some kid at their local church, or for as a part of their severance, after a penalty, you get a much higher take-up rate and a pretty good benefit for employees. I think could help with retention, or could help in terms of cushioning the blow with respect to separation.
That's a great idea. Now, you did mention, Michael, admissions, and so you did mention there's a lot in the news as it relates to admissions. The processes aren't that transparent, it seems. So what advice would you give students and their parents as they're preparing their kids to go through the admissions process? I assume bribes are off the table, and
Or they're on the table.
or they're on the table apparently. Or what other tips and ideas should we be considering as we get our kids prepared to do this?
Yeah, sadly, Andy's right. Bribes are on the table. The admission scandal involving Felicity Huffman and Lori Loughlin, is how you say her name? The
Yep.
Full House woman who's headed to the big house.
Full House to the Big House.
That's right. That's what I want. I want that headline somewhere. That's a good line. That involves illegal activity, but the truth is that the real scandal is what's legal, and I shouldn't say bribery is legal, but let's say Donor preferences are
Sure.
legal.
Oh, yeah.
Preferences for students who are the children of alumni, legacy preferences, something called early decision. All of these things are legal, and they all undermine fairness. They all undermine rewarding achievement when it comes to admissions. They all undermine diversity. So parents, I guess three things to parent. Or, the key things I want to say to parents are, number one, you need to understand that there's only about 200 colleges in the country that are selective. There are 5,000 to 6,000 colleges and universities in this country, post-secondary institutions. About 2,000 are in the four-year space, but you get community colleges, for-profit institutions. Most of these places are not selective. So we're talking about
chill out.
We're talking about a slice. For that slice where they're selective, there's three key things they look at. Admissions officers look at when deciding on an application. Number one is grades. I think high school grades are crucial. Maybe I should say four things, the key things. Number one is grades. The second is curricular rigor. It's one thing if you're getting A's and B's in business math. It's another thing if you're getting A's and B's in algebra 2, calculus. Or if you're getting a B- in calculus versus an A in business math, the calculus student is going to be viewed more favorably. So grades, curricular rigor. SAT and ACT are still important. More and more colleges are going to what's called test optional, which means you don't have to submit your ACT or SAT test scores. Most students still are and will continue to do so. And you can prepare for these tests and you can boost your scores markedly. And then the last is extracurriculars. When I was a boy, you went to college 4 years, you graduated in 4 years. I also wasn't too smart about these things, and I thought, well, I need some extracurricular activities. So my junior year, I started running around, joining every club I could find, from Model UN to Key Club to the sports I was in. And what I've learned...
Flora and fauna.
I did not, but maybe that's a North Carolina thing. What I've learned is that what admissions officers look for is leadership. So you don't need, your kid doesn't need to be doing these 5 or 6 extracurriculars. What they need to be doing is taking some sort of, showing leadership either in an extracurricular activity that's formal, maybe it's being the editor of the yearbook or the editor of the school newspaper, or in something that's not formal, not connected with the school. Maybe it's, I don't know, there's a natural disaster in Sri Lanka, and what your son or daughter decides to do is raise money for toys, and send toys to children, because kids there's all kinds of aid that's going in that's basics in terms of food and blankets, but what a lot of kids need is just one toy that can make their otherwise difficult existence a little more happy. So leadership. So 4 things are grades, SAT, curricular rigor, and leadership. Now, when it comes to the admissions process itself, there are really 2 admissions processes. There's a shadow admissions process, and then there's the regular process. The shadow process is called early decision. Students around October of their senior year are applying to schools, and they are telling the schools, if you accept me, I will go there no matter what. I don't care what my financial aid package is, I'm going. And for the wealthy schools, the selective schools, they're filling 40% of their class with binding early decision students. So for these students, they're finding out in December of their senior year whether they've been accepted or not. And these students are a small class of students, or a small group, because A, they know that this binding early decision system exists as opposed to regular admissions when most people apply. B, they don't have to compare financial aid packages. They have enough financial resources that they can commit and say to the University of Pennsylvania, if you accept me, I will go there. I will not compare the University of Pennsylvania to SUNY Binghamton and go where I get the best deal. I won't negotiate my package with financial aid officers. And the UPenns of the world are filling 40%, 50% of their class with early decision kids, legacy preference kids like Donald Trump Jr., was a legacy student who got into Penn.
Or Hunter Biden.
Hunter gets a bad rap.
I'm just kidding.
He gets a bad rap on admissions, I should say, because he was turned down from Yale Law School initially, and
You probably know
was told
both
to-
sides of the aisle, all the children's, like, all the different ways they've been turned down.
I
and where they
do.
went.
I know a lot about it. I used to know them better. When I worked for Ted Kennedy, we went after legacy preferences, and
Yeah.
it did not make him or me popular.
I imagine not.
With his colleagues and my colleagues, staffers who would help the children of a lot of these folks get into school. Then there's the regular.
Lord's work you were doing there. Good job.
The arc of history is long, but then there's the regular admission system, which is like I said, is most kids, and for that system, like I said, grades, SAT score, curricular rigor, leadership are all important.
And then, and at the regular, you can negotiate, as we talked about earlier. You can try to say you've got into 3 schools and try to see what you can do, right?
Yeah, I got into SUNY Binghamton, which was one of the best public colleges in the country when I was applying to school many years ago. And I got into Boston University. It turned out it was cheaper for me to go to Boston University, even though Boston University's sticker price was vastly higher than SUNY Binghamton because I had gotten so much aid. Now, financial aid has changed at the private colleges now. It's not necessarily based on need. It's often based on other considerations that the schools are prioritizing over financial need.
Probably, too, people should look at net price calculator. Am I right?
Well said, Andy Polk. Back when Andy was on Capitol Hill, he pushed a very good idea called Truth in Tuition, where schools would have to tell families, hey, this is what we're going to charge you, not just your freshman year, but your sophomore, junior, senior year. It could go up, but you would know in advance what it was going to be so you could plan instead of getting whacked when you're a junior with a 20% price increase. Andy lost that fight, but a consolation compromise, I guess, was creation of something called the net price calculator, which is on every college's website, where you can plug in your financial information and get an estimate of what you will not just have to pay this year, but what you'll have to pay in future years. There's 2 other websites I'd like to flag before we go here. Number one is something called collegeresults.org. College Results Online, collegeresults.org. You can look up any 4-year college in the country, and you can get a ton of very, very useful information on that school in terms of its price, its graduation rates, its underrepresented minority graduation rates, how it compares to peer institutions that have similar SAT scores, similar GPA among their freshman class, and what those institutions charge and how successful those institutions are in terms of getting students to graduate. So that's one site I wanted to flag for. And the second is FAFSA Forecaster, FAFSA 4, the number 4, Caster, CASTER.org. FAFSA Forecaster allows a family to plug in their financial data and get an idea of just how much federal financial aid they're likely to receive when it comes time to go to college, how big their Pell Grant's likely to be, how big their tuition discount's likely to be, and what days they're likely to pay. And it takes 15 minutes. It's far easier than the FAFSA form itself, but it helps with families who might be overestimating the cost of college and underestimating their financial aid.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I think one of the key themes through all these discussions is that we aren't searching for enough information and tracking enough information and looking at it and educating ourselves. Because, I mean, if you think about it, we compare our phone plans, we compare our cable plans. When you're trying to buy a house, you're looking at all the different demographics in the area to see what the school systems are there. And then all of a sudden, when we're sending a kid to college, it's like all we look at is the brand name or the sticker price, and we're not considering all these other resources and ideas about how we can make sure our kids going to the right school, going to graduate on time, and the amounts that we're going to pay for their education. So
you're absolutely right.
More information, more insight, and looking at that. So we hope, discussing these things has given some ideas to folks about what they can do, how they can better manage it, places they can go visit. You can also contact me Andy Polk at FDRA, and I can try to guide you as well. These are issues that I hold near and dear. That's why I work with Michael on Truth and Tuition. It was Michael's idea. It wasn't my idea. Michael came up with it. And it's one of those things where a conservative member worked with a Democrat. And with a think tank Michael was working for at the time to come together to figure out, like, this is a huge issue. This is about 10 years ago. And it's still going on, and there's still these issues. So hopefully, as we hit this 2020 cycle, we'll see really good policy come out to address some of this. I don't know that waving all the debt away is the solution to quality education and affordability. But, I think we need to have honest discussions about these things. But just today, I always learn something from Michael, but today I've learned people just aren't challenging themselves to get the right information and going a little bit deeper so they make better decisions. So, educate yourselves about education, I guess, is the best way to do it, right?
Information is power. Thanks,
we go.
Andy.
Jasmine, I'm going to bring you in to wrap us up.
Okay.
What are we doing today? Are we doing fashion, footwear, and focus segment? Or
I think it would be interesting to see what your footwear likes are. Just personally, I'm kind of curious.
Yeah, that is interesting.
But I do have some trends. So, are you like a big footwear guy? You could care less.
I can tell you
Don't
about his
say
wife.
You could care less, but yes.
I'll tell you, my favorite footwear company, I hope it's part of your association, is the Simple Footwear Company.
Simple footwear.
They make simple sneakers. They they were favored by Larry David, if anyone ever watches the Larry David show.
right.
Okay.
And they went out of business, it's seemingly a few years ago, but came back maybe 10 months ago, and I was on a waiting list in order
wow.
to
Wow.
purchase my sneakers
What do you love
from
about
Simple.
them?
They're simple. I don't know what to tell you, man.
I'm assuming really comfortable too.
They're super comfortable walking shoes.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
And Andy said your wife is a big shoe girl. So did she break your pockets? I hope so.
she wears Chucks.
I hope so.
Chucks all the
She
time.
does. She
lives in
does.
Brooklyn.
And my 9-year-old wears Chucks, and
Awesome.
we look like a hipster family.
Very cool.
All right, folks, this is the Shoe and Show covering the ins and outs of all things footwear. I want to thank my friend Michael Danaberg for coming in today to really kind of educate us about all these different things that are occurring around student loan debts, how to better prepare ourselves. It just seems like it's a huge part of all of our lives, and yet we don't put enough effort into understanding these things. So, Michael, thank you for coming in, spending your time talking to us. Michael also does this for presidential candidates and has for many years. So we are fortunate to have him come in and help educate us on these things. Thank you for that.
Thanks for having me.
Folks, you can catch us on shoeandshow.com. We're on Twitter. We're on Spotify. We're everywhere that we need to be for podcasting. Please rate us. Please let us know if you have ideas for topics of shows that you would like to cover. We cover shoes, but these things are also really important to our shoe industry. So anything around policy stuff or politics that you'd like to discuss, we're happy to have that. Just drop us a line. On behalf of Jasmine, Matt, and myself, we want to thank you for listening. Until next time, Shoein is out.
Shoein has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.